On the Trail of New England's Vampires by the distinguished folklorist and our good friend, Dr. Michael Bell, a past guest on the show. And by the way, check out his new vampire blog. Vampires are a popular topic today, as I'm sure you know. And his vampire blog is at https://apps.vampiresgrasp.com/blog. Okay, I think we better put that on our website.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to remember.
Well,
all right, and now to our subject for this morning. Then some questions that are almost never asked. What can the paranormal do to your health, and what can we do about it?
And so to our guest, Dr. Rita Louise grew up in a haunted house, but this is not where her interactions with what are commonly called ghosts, spirits, and what she refers to as attached entities ends. For the past 20 years, she has worked with paranormal groups around the country. She has been featured in a documentary entitled Jefferson, the City of Spirits, and is currently a member of Metroplex Paranormal Investigations, a ghost hunting group based in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Louise is the author of the books Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, I hope she'll correct me if I didn't pronounce that correctly, The Power Within, and her newly released Dark Angels. She is the founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics and the host of Just Energy Radio. As a naturopath, clairvoyant, and 20-year veteran of the human potential field, she has provided insights into these unseen dimensions for thousands of clients around the world. Her website is www.ritalouise.com. And call in and join our discussion today, 766-1240 in the local listening area, anywhere in the USA, 800-449-1240. And take it away, Ben.
Dr. Louise, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be here with you guys today.
Well, that's very good.
Thank you.
Actually, we're going to just take 1 second because we have a caller who believes that he or she has the answer to the question. Please, go ahead. Welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to take a shot.
Please.
Apoplexy.
Wrong. Sorry. No, that's not quite what it is. I would say something a little more physical. Okay.
Okay.
All right, try again. But thank you for calling.
Going back to the house of Seven Gables.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. All right, Dr. Louise, welcome once again to Behind the Paranormal. Ben's got our first question.
That I do. What exactly are dark angels?
Well, I mean, when you talk about an angel, in the general sense of the word, we're talking about a spiritual being, a being that doesn't have a body. And so when people think about that, there's more than just angels around. You know, because angels are on one end of a spectrum of beings, just like in the human race, there are very kind and high-vibrating individuals, and then there's not-so-good people that hang around. And when you talk about in the spirit world, in the world where people don't have bodies, you have angels on one end, all the way down to attached entities and demons on the far end of the spectrum. And so when I talk about dark angels, I'm talking about the not so high vibrating ones, or the ones that aren't necessarily there to give spiritual guidance.
Okay, a lot of people on this show, a lot of people on this show talk about vibrations, and in 40 years of paranormal investigation, I have to admit I'm not entirely sure what they're talking about. Could you talk a little bit about vibrations and what you mean by that?
Great question. No one's ever asked me that on air. Well, when you talk about especially emotional vibration, it is believed that the energy of love has a higher frequency. When we experience love or joy or happiness, it opens us up energetically. It increases our internal vibration. Our blood flows more. We just are higher. You know, we experience a higher vibration of energy.
You're talking about energy.
Of energy,
yeah.
Correct. And when you experience negative emotions like fear or anger or rage or jealousy, it shuts us down, and it also has a lower energy vibration. And so when you're picking up vibration in that way, you know, you're talking about the frequency of the emotional energy.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. All right, let's move a little deeper here because we wanted to talk about this show is never long enough for talking about what we need to, and I've always been concerned for the issues of physical health effects of people who live in paranormally, I don't know, should I use the word infested or active maybe areas, because nobody seems to ask that question. It comes up all the time, of course, in psychology. For example, is somebody having paranormal experiences because they have neural or psychiatric issues? That always comes up. The issue of direct physical effects, such as me getting hit in the head by a chair or in the leg by a television thrown by a poltergeist, that's another thing. But what I'm talking about are deeper physical effects. Now, before we even ask about that, I'll have to just bring out a point here. Now, and we discussed this a little by email. Your approach is, we don't suppress any opinions on this show. Everybody's welcome, to be heard with respect and is. But it doesn't mean we don't disagree. Your approach, as we said earlier in our emails, is kind of what I call traditional. Okay, disembodied spirits and things of this kind. Essentially, I call it spiritualism. I kind of left that very, very long time ago. As a student for the priesthood, I approached this with, many preconceptions and ideas. And in my personal opinion, they weren't good enough. None of the spiritualism was good enough. And again, I could be wrong, but it's led me on a different path all these years. So while you're talking about, disembodied spirits and this sort of thing, I don't really believe that. I think these things are in parallel worlds that are just as physical as ours, including angels. Now, not entirely, and physicality may mean something different in different worlds. Different physics may apply, but that's the way I approach. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're both right. I don't know. So go ahead if you have a comment, please.
I'm totally not disagreeing with you. I mean, I believe that we exist on a physical plane of dense energy vibration. And so that's why we can see the computer, that's why we can see each other, that's why we can see a chair. It's because we exist in the physical world. To me, when you're talking about ghosts and disembodied spirits or whatever, they exist in a different plane of reality, either in a different realm, a different dimension, so we can interact with them, you can see them, you can experience them in and around you and in your life, but they don't exist on the physical plane. They do not exist on the physical plane.
Well, how come I had an actual physical fight with a poltergeist one time and felt resistance and got resistance in return? How do you explain that?
Because they can't interact with us on the physical plane, because we can interact with their energy.
Yeah.
But for the average person, they're unable, there's a certain level of awareness. We can change our level of awareness so that we can sense them and react to them. But, it's that borderline between, are you a regular person or are you crazy? My background is that I'm an intuitive. I mean, that's what I bring to the table with the groups that I work with, is I'm the group psychic. And so I'll sit there and start talking about, they look like this and blah, 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 and, give all kinds of information. They're going, well, where are they? And it's like, well, they're standing over there.
Yeah.
Because they don't see them, because their level of awareness isn't as open, isn't as high, unless you're dealing with something that has such strong energy that it can really penetrate into the physical plane and interact with us in that way. Okay,
well, I see where you're coming from, but let's go on to the health stuff that we wanted to really talk about. And I'm looking for your insight here, because there are a lot of questions that I don't feel competent to answer. I really never have. For example, moving into cases where we have these negative entities, we call them parasites. You might call them dark angels, whatever words you use. I'm sure we're talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. They do seem to, as the ancient Babylonians said, be life-sucking ghosts, as they said. Whatever they may be, they do seem to suck the energy out of people, and the physical consequences can be startling. And I'd like to know if you've run into the same thing and what your take on it is. Chronic fatigue syndrome. very common in my experience in cases where these negative entities have occurred. Physical effects such as very, very active electrical fields, electromagnetic fields that have been linked in other contexts, in the context of electropollution, as it's called, with cancer. And this is what I'm concerned. And nobody seems to be looking into this. And we wanted to hear your take on that. What have you run into in that regard? And what is your interpretation of how to deal with that, or whether it's connected or what? What are your thoughts on the physical effects of these negative entities?
Well, I mean, they totally can have physical effects on people. And let me kind of make a distinction for your listeners, because you made a comment a little earlier in the show about, living in an infested environment. I gave a presentation not that long ago on this topic, talking about attached entities, which is what I call them, which are parasites. Okay, so I'm not disagreeing with you there at all. And so the comment that I got after my presentation was, well, can you just pick one of these up? And if you're in and around entities, it doesn't mean that they're going to attach to you, period.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, that just needs to be made clear.
Mm-hmm.
When an entity attaches to you or it becomes parasitic, it actually enters inside the auric field of our body. And once it's in the auric field of our body, we assume that its energy, its thoughts, its beliefs, its emotions are ours. And that's where it really starts creating problems. And so if it's tired, we feel tired. If it is nasty and negative and condescending or whatever, we experience that emotion, that thought pattern, but we assume it's us. We assume we're a nasty, negative person. And so let me kind of switch the table here. When you're talking about health, it is we manifest disease in the physical body because we have an underlying negative/limiting thought. And so if I think no one wants to hear what I have to say, or what I say is not important, then we're going to make the choice to not communicate our thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and emotions. We're not going to self-express. By holding on to our self-expression, it can manifest as thyroid disease. It can manifest as throat cancer, things going on in the larynx, because that's where our communication energy is held in the body. And so that limiting belief might be ours. However, that limiting belief could also be attached to the entity, but we think that belief is ours, and so we're acting on its belief, and we're making choices based on a reality that's not our reality.
Okay, well, let me just remind everybody our call-in numbers today, 766-1240 locally, 800-449-1240 from anywhere in the USA. And Ben had a question.
Yes, I can. Yeah. All right, Dr. Louisa, what are some of your own experiences with parasites or dark angels?
Well, I've had some really interesting ones. This one is probably one of my favorites. And so I was working with a woman. I'm a naturopath. I do medical intuitive work with my clients. And so a woman came to me, and her complaint was bulimia. And so in my opinion, in my frame of reference, bulimia is not really a physical issue. It's more of a psychological issue, or at least that was my initial doctor brain interpretation of it. And so she came in for the session, sits down, and we're talking, and I'm going, okay, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do here, but I'm just going to open it up and see what is going to come through me and what guidance I can give to this woman. And so at one point in time, she made the comment, a psychic told her that she was possessed. And at first I just blew it off because, yeah, you're possessed, I'll get rid of the demon, pay me $5,000, I'll light a couple of candles, and it'll all be good. I mean, I've heard that before. But then I said, well, let me just take a little look-see to see if she has an entity attached to her. And lo and behold, there was this very hungry man standing behind her. And let me even back up a second. When I asked her how much she ate, and she said 6 Big Macs, and I went, is that with the fries and Cokes? And she said, oh, yeah.
It's not per
like,
day, I hope.
And I said, so is that, throughout the course of the day, or is that, just for one meal? She goes, oh, no, that's for lunch.
Wait.
I was
6 Big Macs for
Big
lunch?
Big Mac with the fries and the Coke.
Oh, my ears
and she was not a big woman. She was not a big woman. And I'm a very thin person, okay? And my jaw was just hanging down to my chest. And I was like, and then what do you do? She goes, well, then I go in the bathroom and throw it all up. So anyway, so back to the story. So we spent some time. When I work with an attached entity, one of the things that I realized is that they have issues. They're hanging around here because they have issues. And so I do energy work with my clients. I do entity work with these entities. I help ground them. I help to make it so that they can let go of the person as well as let go of the physical plane. And then I help them to take their next step. And so we did the session. It felt very successful. The entity moved on. 2 weeks later, I got a call back from her, and she said that as soon as the session was over, by the next day, she was eating normally again and did not have. It was done. It was gone.
Yeah. Okay. I guess. What is your definition of an attached entity?
To me, an attached entity, and you might disagree with my very hard-line definition, but I'll counter probably. An attached entity is an entity that actually enters into the auric field and exerts control over the individual. Now, there are attached entities that I tend to put more into the haunting perspective, where they hang around a person in a location and bug them, but they're not entering into the auric field and exerting mental and emotional control.
All right, what is the auric field?
Okay, the auric field is the energy field around us, and we've all experienced that energy field.
Yeah, the bioelectric field, I've heard it called something.
Right, but it's our personal space, and we've all had the experience where someone that we don't really want to have stand too close to us, they kind of get in your face, and you're like, hey, you're in my space. It's because they're in our auric field, and it's our first line of defense. And when anything enters into that space, like I said, we assume it's ours. And it could be emotional energy from other people. It could be the energy of responsibility from other people. Like if you've ever gone to one of those timeshare presentations, you go and the energy is so high and it gets your energy high, even though you go, we're just going for the free trip, we don't want no timeshare. But the energy gets into your aura. And we take on that energy and we think, oh, well, maybe I really do want this thing. And you think it's your thoughts, and sometimes you sign up and wonder, well, what did I do that for? You walk out, and 2 hours later you're going, what did I just do?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't your energy.
Okay, I hear you. Let me throw you something here that happens to us and get your interpretation of it. Okay, maybe Ben will say something about this because it happens to him as well as to me. We'll be on a case, and if it really is something going on, very active, we'll walk into a certain room, for example, and we will just feel sometimes dizzy. Yeah. Ben sometimes gets sick to his stomach. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about
that. That only happened once.
Yeah.
That's because it was right up in my face, and I was just like, oh, my God, I'm going to throw up.
Yeah. So, these you're right. These things really do move in, at times. Now, I don't know. Again, this is my interpretation, but people have often asked me, is it possible, because we talk about parasites, is it possible that some of these are human? Now, I have never interpreted them as human. I've looked for it. Perhaps it's my mistake. Maybe there's so little humanity left that they just don't come across this way. But I've often been, is it possible the parasitical people, and there are plenty of them, as we all know, is it possible that they, in the classical sense, die and do whatever and become parasites? I said, well, I personally have never run into entities. I've run into entities that pretend to be human in order to push your buttons so they can eat. But I've never, in my opinion, run into something that actually is human, no matter how human you treat it. Now, I don't know. What's your interpretation of that? Am I naive or what?
Let me address the upset stomach thing.
Of course.
First, and then we'll go on. When I go into a location and the energy in the location is negative or really heavy and I'll get nauseous. First thing. I'll just walk in and go, and the other people in the group are like, are you okay? It's like, no, my stomach is just knotting up, and they'll go, well, are you sick? It's like, no, it's just the energy here. I mean, I know that we're going into someplace good when my stomach goes, because our bodies receive information. I mean, we are all intuitive beings. And so when you go into a location where the energy is just that heavy, especially in the stomach area, is where it controls our ability to use our power, both for ourselves and in relationship to other people. So our willpower, it's our ability to control our environment. It is also how other people use that energy to try to control someone else. And so if there's a controlling entity hanging around that location, where you're going to feel it is right in the gut immedely. Mm-hmm. Or if you're sensitive. So, Ben, I just kind of get the impression that you might be just a little sensitive.
I guess. It's a good way to put it. I mean, I don't really question what happens, because then I'm just like, then I get too into it and overanalyze, and then it just completely takes away from the whole experience.
That's an interesting dynamic with us. I have, many years of seminary studies, the scholarly work and all this stuff, grad work in abnormal psychology, and sometimes I have to fight that. Because it can, if the brain takes over from the heart, it's no better than if the heart takes over from the brain. There has to be a balance, mm-hmm. in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You as a PhD would know that probably better than anybody. So, but Ben doesn't have that baggage. He's real honest, and so I kind of look very carefully at what happens to him and how he reacts. Let's go back to the idea of you'd mentioned possession. Now, you and I both worked with that. But what's your take on it? What is it? How does it come about? And how do you deal with it?
How it comes about, I don't really know, because I only ever get, the after effect. But my experience, because what I'm talking about is my observation and interaction with people or locations from a very intuitive place. People come to me, they got stuff stuck. When someone is possessed, when an entity is attached, they are in the auric field. And so they can exert control and influence. So as an example, someone with schizophrenia, not always, but if they have like the paranoid pieces to it, et cetera, or the auditory hallucinations, those people always have entities in their auric field. They're not possessed. They're in the auric field. When someone experiences a full-blown possession, actually the entity is even ruder, because it's rude to step into someone's personal space, okay? So there's a level of disconcern about who you are, okay? When you're possessed, they actually step inside the body and take control of the body. And so are you guys familiar with the concept of channeling, like Ramtha is a full-body channel?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the idea.
And so when someone is possessed, it's kind of like, because Ramtha is the energy or the entity that comes into J.B. Knight's body. I think that's her name. And it's like the entity is not high vibrating. It's kind of like a nasty entity who stepped into the body and won't leave.
Okay. All right. Well, again, my interpretation is somewhat different. One of the things that I kind of came to the conclusion early on, again, this is me, was that I couldn't, I was amazed at how people would do seances or do Ouija boards or whatever, and they would believe everything they're told. I early on began to suspect that every ghost was guilty until proven innocent, so to speak, and I've really kind of stuck with that, and it's really paid off, because there are many times I'll go into a case in the past, and it's Uncle Fred is still with us, he's doing this, he's doing that, And things just didn't seem right, and I would make it very clearly known that I didn't believe this is Uncle Fred. The entire nature of the thing changed, and it was, you're going to make Uncle Fred mad. Well, I don't think that's what it was. And the whole nature of it changed into one of these classic, what I refer to again as parasites, and we dealt with it accordingly, and it worked. I don't trust these things. What say you?
I don't trust him either, especially if you're using tools like a Ouija board or automatic writing. That's one of the best ways, or not one of the best ways, but it is definitely a way that you can get an entity attached to you.
Sure.
Because, they do the bait and switch. That's one of the things that they do. It's like you start getting information from them, and it seems all high and great answers, and there's all this enlightenment that, you get from these beings. And then they get you hooked because they get you believing it, and then they bait and switch turn around and start becoming negative and awful. Yeah. I had a client who she had been involved in metaphysics for over 20 years, 35 years. I mean, a long time, a really long time. Or as they say, 40 days and 40 nights. And she had taken up automatic writing about 5 years ago. And the information she was bringing through the automatic writing at first was great. And then she started hearing her quote-unquote guide. He was actually directly communicating with her. And she was like, oh, well, this is even better. And so she encouraged the movement because she thought she was spiritually opening up to higher levels of information. Well, by the time she called me, she had multiple voices talking to her. She had music, like weird music, going on around her, and it was driving her crazy. She goes, if it was just the one guy, it would be okay. She goes, but they don't ever shut up.
Most guys don't.
And so when I looked at her, she had, and I'm just trying to add up, she had about 10 different, I'll use your word, parasites attached to her. She had 3 vortexes opened into her auric field, and a vortex is like a big doorway, and it's, with a big sign that says, hey, open space, Yeah,
the dinner bell, yeah.
And so she had these beings that were coming and going, and some of them were just plain nasty, and so there's dealing with getting rid of the entities, and they're dealing with closing up the vortexes so that her auric field is again protecting her.
Yeah. Okay, Doctor, we're going to take a break here. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal with Dr. Rita Louise and our discussion of health and the paranormal.
New River Press is proud to sponsor tonight's segment of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Benjamin Eno. New River Press offers the best in unusual New Age books. Stand by the side of tonight's host, Paul Eno, as he battles poltergeists and helps suffering souls and families in the critically acclaimed books Faces at the Window and Footsteps in the Attic. Plunge deeper into the paranormal with Paul and learn about its influence on human history, its action in our daily lives, and its ultimate meaning for us in the best-selling Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny. Available now from New River Press, publishers of unusual books. Visit newriverpress.com, amazon.com, or your favorite bookstore. And set for release late this year in one of the most unusual books on the subject ever written, Paul gives us Dancing Past the Graveyard, What Ghosts Have to Say About God.
Okay, we're back Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM in the beautiful Blackstone Valley of New England, and onworldwide.com. Our guest, Dr. Rita Louise, expert in alternative medicine and many other things, and we're talking about the paranormal and its health effects on us, and we're talking about a lot more than that, too. So, Dr. Louise, we were talking about possession, something that is often on people's minds but is very little understood. My interpretation of it is this, essentially, that these, as I call them, parasites, whatever you want to call them, tend to get stronger. And I always noticed early on that cases would start out with just footsteps or a little bit of pounding or a voice here and there. And then as people would get more upset, pump out more energy, so to speak, the things would feed on it, get stronger. And the ultimate, logical or illogical conclusion that it can come to is when people bond with the things. And in several cases, I've seen people who thought this is a lover from a former life, and I got to deal with it, and they bond with this entity, which in my experience is not human, and what results can be possession, and I've dealt with it in psychiatric hospitals and all sorts of stuff. I'm sure you've done too. Now, you mentioned that these things can control people's bodies, unless I heard you wrong. I've never really found that. I think there has to be a certain amount of tacit agreement on the part of the person who is the victim. Again, what say you?
I totally agree. And so let me give an example. So the person that is doing the automatic writing or the Ouija board, they are saying inadvertently, come to me, I want your assistance. So they are the ones opening the door. What I have found in my work is that the most common place that an entity will start an attachment, okay, is in childhood. Interestingly enough.
Yeah.
And let me explain. So if a child is, and all right, I'm going to share this with you and your audience. I had an entity attached to me. And the entity attached to me, I don't know when it attached. I can tell you for sure that I was aware of its presence, not that it was an entity, but because I thought it was me from the time I was about 3, 4. Was it attached to me prior to that? It's possible. I don't know. But one of the things that I have seen is that if a child grows up in a traumatic living environment, whether it be physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse is a big one, what does the child do? It can't go to its parents for aid and assistance, and so it calls out into the universe for help. And so implicitly, they are opening the door for the entity to come in. Now what happens? The entity comes in, and it makes you be angry. It makes you be tough. It makes you cross your arms and go, screw you, I'm not going to do that. It makes it, like in cases of sexual abuse, and I think you'll find this interesting. Well, actually, I'll speak on this point. In those situations, there's always a certain amount of disassociation that happens from the body. When we disassociate on an energetic level, we as spirit are leaving the body to a certain extent. The more we leave, the more room there is for the being to come in. Period. And so when a child, especially in sexual abuse, is in the abuse situation, you hear stories. It's like, well, I was over there and I could watch it happen, but I was paralyzed. They've disassociated, but somebody else is running their body. Somebody. Sometimes they have no recollection because they've disassociated so far, and it is the entity that has come in and taken over.
Yeah.
Now, in a really weird, dysfunctional way, it is actually helping the child. It's not, it's a very dysfunctional kind of help, but it's help.
I hear you, yeah.
And where it becomes the rub is when the child grows up and wants to do healing in those areas and grow in those areas. It's like, well, why am I always so angry? Why do I react this way? Why don't I have memories about these things? That's where the entity issue comes up, or they can't make the change because the entity is there interfering.
Mm-hmm. So would you be concerned with a child who has an invisible friend?
I do not discourage it with people because the invisible friend is external, but I do tell the parents to watch out because sometimes if they're open to receiving the invisible friend, something nastier can actually come through.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I've had the same experience. Now, I'm sitting here with my own son, whom my wife and I, I can say debated, but we thought together for a very long time whether we should let him get involved in this. But again, he grew up with it. He's kind of, I guess, in a unique circumstance. And he's been very, very good at the cases. He knows when to bow out, and he really he puts his finger on things. He is very sensitive. And I'm very proud of him, the way he carries himself on with this. But he's developed a practice that, if he doesn't mind my asking your opinion on.
Sure, go for it.
And that's meditating and we've been criticized for this, meditating in haunted rooms, quote unquote, as someone on the net said. I don't do it. But while I'm talking with the person in the house who's, if you want to say the victim or the percipient or whatever, Ben is sometimes off meditating. I don't know if you want to describe any of your experiences doing that.
I don't remember.
Okay, yeah, he doesn't remember much of what he says, but he comes out with all sorts of insights.
I just sort of let the police take me away.
Yeah, our whole philosophy is,
if that makes any sense.
Let the site teach us.
Yeah.
Do you think would you advise that is wise or unwise, or depends on the person, or what? Or
I mean, when I go into a location, because what you're doing, Ben, is you're opening yourself up. Okay, so from a psychic, intuitive perspective, when we meditate, we have energy that runs through us. That's just part of our human nature. Is we're energy beings. We just are in a dense physical existence.
Yes.
And when you meditate, it opens up the flow of energy in us. And when that flow of energy is open, it allows us to perceive more. So it totally makes sense that when you go and meditate, that you walk out with all kinds of insight. Period. That totally makes sense to me.
Okay.
Again, my observation is that an entity or a parasite will not attach to us unless we ask it to. We have somehow implicitly opened the door. And so I don't get the impression that Ben is in a mental place that he will let it happen. Like, I don't want them to attach to me. It's like, I'll come visit you at your house, and you just stay there. Do not follow me home, and I have very clear guidelines and rules about my intention and what I will and will not allow them to do.
Okay.
And I think you guys are pretty clear in that area as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's reassuring. We have one or two emails that came in for you, but I wanted to get one deeper question in here. To me, it seems that when we're talking about health effects across the boundaries of worlds, whether you consider it a physical world and spiritual world, or as we do a bunch of parallel physical world, mostly physical worlds, however you want to think about it, there is a problem, seemingly, with the transfer of, I don't know if you want to say material or energy or whatever. And what I mean by that is that this does seem to be an open system. That interaction does seem to be possible. There doesn't seem to be any impediment to, for example, I have a coin sometimes, which is from a country that never existed. And it appears, disappears, but it comes back and forth across what I or some physicists might call the membrane of a parallel world. But if that can happen, then, speaking on our health theme as we are today, is it possible that alien, if you want to call them, microbes can come back and forth? Because when the Europeans, as we know, came to America, they brought bacteria and viruses and stuff to which the natives were not immune, and many of the natives died because of it. Look at it seems like we have a lot of strange diseases coming around today, and I wonder if the increased, and this is a subject for another show, the increased interaction among these worlds is perhaps letting in microbes, not just ghosts or whatever you want to call them. What do you think of that? Is that a possible concern health-wise?
Well, I never thought about it, and I'll be honest, it's like I've never thought to look at someone that has a health issue from that perspective. Because it's really about what I want to look at, and I've never thought to look at somebody from that perspective.
Yeah.
However, I do have a however. I had a woman who had this, muscle. If you looked at, her arms, it looked like there were, if a woman gets, a lumpectomy, and you look at the breast tissue, it's kind of like there's, a little divot missing, underneath the skin from the lumpectomy. I'm trying to think of a visual here. And on her, arms and on certain spots on her legs, she had these areas that almost looked like she had a lumpectomy done. And her complaint was she had these the image she kept showing me was an alligator clip, on these arms that were coming in and picking at her skin and taking it away. And so there was that, and that was coming from another dimension. I don't know where that was coming from, but it was very clear that it was happening. In addition, she had, and this was totally gross to me, these like amoeba things all over her. Do you guys watch Star Trek? Like
Sure.
Star Trek Next Generation?
Yeah. I grew up with it. Yeah.
Okay, so there was the one episode where it had data with the telephone, and they were like cutting Diana Troy because she was a piece of cake, and it was just these weird visions. But when he shined the light on them in a certain way, they had these like amoeba things on their head and different parts of their body. Anyway, she had these things all over her, and they were like sucking the skin out of her, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. Period.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's where we really, I suppose, have to stop, because how could you find an answer to this without further research? And I certainly am not competent to do it. It's just...
Well, but if you sit there and you say something to a doctor about it, they just look at you like you're nuts anyway.
Oh, I don't know. I've addressed groups of psychiatrists on the issue. Well, not precisely this issue, but the issue of perhaps schizophrenia, for example, at least in some cases, not being a chemical imbalance that causes illusions, but one that opens doors to real worlds that are actually there. And they stare at you, and they will sometimes laugh, or steam will come out of their ears, but they'll come up to you individually, and they'll say, I've often wondered the same thing, but I don't dare say it because I'll lose my job. And very often, IMDs, doctors will sometimes say the same thing in the vein of what we've just talked about. I'm thinking of some time I spent with Bud Hopkins, the alien abduction expert, and what you described, especially those gouges and everything. I've seen that again and again in poltergeist cases. And he had a photo album. This particular occasion we were visiting. And he showed me precisely the same things that he believed were caused by aliens during abduction. I mean, so maybe I don't know, maybe we have too many terms for the same thing. I don't know. This all opens questions that we don't have time to discuss tonight, but maybe we'll have you back and we can continue.
Well, I mean, I think the concept of schizophrenia, I mean, I've worked with a number of people that were schizophrenic, and there are two different things that I've noticed. One, and the telltale sign of someone that has schizophrenia, just the telltale sign. So if I say the word chakras, are you aware of what that is? Are your listeners aware of that concept?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Energy centers, in the body.
The energy centers, exactly.
Yeah.
Someone that has schizophrenia always has blown out chakras. And so a chakra is supposed to open and close, with being fully open, which is not really healthy, but being fully open is being at 100%.
That's exactly right.
And these guys, their chakras will be 110, 120. They're blown out. I mean, they're literally blown out. And they are receiving too much information. I mean, because that's what the chakras do. They send and receive information. And so they're on information overload.
Yep.
So that is the telltale sign of someone that has schizophrenia. So they might not have any delusions. They might not have any, auditory hallucinations. There might not be the paranoia attached to it. That's just your regular old schizophrenic.
Mm-hmm.
When you have the ones that have the auditory hallucinations, that have the quote unquote visual hallucinations, those are always. I mean, if they say, well, somebody's talking to them, it's like, well, yeah, and they're sitting right there.
Sure. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, boy, we're opening up a whole new subject here. We'll have to have you back to discuss this, but we're running out of time. But I did want to run an email past you that came in for you before the show. And this is from Jamie Daniels in Chichester, New Hampshire. And Jamie asks a very simple question that seems to be on the minds of a lot of our listeners. Have you ever had a ghost follow you home?
No.
Okay. I think maybe it's addressed to both of us. I haven't either, really, that I can think of. I've had them try, but a lot of entities seem to be attached to certain areas, physically speaking, I guess. Areas with high tension wires seem to be active, that sort of thing. You can interpret that in different ways, but I guess I can honestly say generally no. I've had them try, but I'm not aware of any of that have succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, I have ghosts that will come around, but they tend to be relatives, friends. You know, I had this one guy that showed up in my living room one day that I couldn't figure out who he was, and he was there for about 3 or 4 hours. My dog found him first, and I was like, "What are you barking at?" And I looked up, and there was this guy standing in my living room. So I immediately called my husband and said, there's this guy standing in our living room.
Yeah.
You know, only when you work in this field can you make a phone call like that, and they
That's
don't think,
right.
like, what are you talking about?
Yep.
And I was like, well, do you know who it is? And he goes, no. And I'm like, okay, was checking.
Oh boy! Oh, there you go. Okay, we're gonna just take a little quick phone call here. Hi, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Paul. This is Rich from Florida.
Hi, Rich. Oh, Rich.
Field reporter. Hi.
Okay.
How are you?
Very good. Okay, Rich, I'm going to ask you to hold on just a second here.
Sure.
Rich is one of our new show reporters. Dr. Rita, too, we have several reporters who have signed on to the show to call in from their own respective geographical areas to report on any interesting phenomena that might be going on there. So, Rich, just hold on just for a second here. I just wanted to finish with Dr. Rita.
Sure.
Doctor, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being on with us. We got a few minutes down today because we got football game coming up, or a basketball game coming up from somewhere, and sports, of course, is important on the station. So I wanted to thank you again, and we will be in touch. And your input has been very, very interesting, and good luck in your work. However, before you say goodbye, tell us about your book and where people can get it.
Okay, they can go to the RitaLouise.com. Well, I'm sitting here thinking, do I have the book on that? They can go to www.darkangelsbook.com. That's darkangelsbook.com. It's also available on Amazon.com.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and
Thanks
we'll be
for
in
having
touch.
me, and yes, this was a very intriguing conversation. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll talk to you
thank
soon.
you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Rich, welcome to the show, and welcome aboard as a reporter. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. I've been involved with this approximately 25 years.
Okay.
My first paranormal experience was an OBE, and I was 15 years old at that time. And I decided to start researching exactly what happened to me that day because it was enough to actually, shock your system.
Okay, and OBE just being an out-of-the-body experience, in case anybody
Correct.
doesn't know. Okay.
Yeah, and ironically, it was an OBE with my aunt who happened to have had approximately 13 epileptic seizures that morning. And what really caught my attention was it felt like a dream at first, and I felt like I was in someone else's body. I was a lot smaller, and next thing you knew, I felt like things blacking out and me falling at the doorway. Next thing you knew, when I did come out of it and I ran to my grandmother's home where my aunt lived, that's exactly where she was. It's almost as if I had left her there. So after that experience, I decided to start researching the paranormal and trying to understand. That's how I came across OBE, out-of-body experience, and started really getting involved into all types of studies involving haunts, everything from haunts to even cryptozoology, and getting interested more and more into anything that had to do with paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And a few years down the road, of course, you grow up, you got to get a job, you get a family, but that just kept nagging me that I left it alone, and decided to get back into it. Decided to get into the field again by myself, and then I joined a team, Florida Ghost Team, and then from there I started my own team, National Paranormal Society, and from there I started another one called Paranormal Consulting Agency, which is the team we have right now.
Okay.
And we've been doing this for easily well over 25 years, separately and with other people as well.
Very good. You have a website?
We have a website right now, but it's under construction,
Okay.
and we've been actually working to make sure that it's up and running because we're trying to put all the files on there.
Okay.
But if anything, we're taking all the files that we had from the previous team, maybe including them, and also adding a whole lot more with our new team, because we've had approximately, I'd say, close to 10 cases since we started in, I believe, mid this year, around April, ironically.
Okay. All right. Well, Ben says hello, too.
I do.
And
hello.
Welcome aboard, and we're glad to have you. And Rich came up with the excellent suggestion of having emails for all the guys, all the reporters on the site, behindtheparanormal.com, and we will do that. Rich, we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks for calling in.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to meet you, too.
Okay, thanks to our producer, Craig Pelletier, and check with us next week, and we're going to have an interesting guest. And tomorrow night, too, on CBS, we're going to have Lloyd Pye, who said that great statement, everything you know is wrong about human origins. Check it out, CBS Radio and PsychicOnAir.com, BehindTheParanormal.com. You'll be able to find out just where you can hear us, and we'll see you next week.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.